Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. It's free for all Friday, 888-589-8840 if you want to join the program. Let's go quickly to James in Kokomo, Indiana. James, I want to thank you for calling Focal Point and thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind? Okay, it looks like we're having a bulky software, phone caller software situation. So, James, hang tight. We'll see if we can get that cranked up and get you right back on the air. So hang tight, my friend, and we'll get to you just as soon as we can. Rob, while we're waiting to hook up with James, why don't we play clip number 4? Okay, we're back. We got James. Let's bring James in if we can. Keep trying to get James on the air. Do we have him yet? There we go. James, Kokomo, Indiana. Welcome to Focal Point. Thanks for waiting. What's on your mind?
Well, this is going to tie into about everything I'm going to say about gun control. If the American people don't wake up and everybody owns guns and legally has them, they take them away, which is that's what they're after. You're talking about slavery. We're all going to be slaves. We're no longer going to be citizens. We're going to be subjects. And when you think about what they talk about euthanasia, I happen to be handicapped myself. And those are one of my worries. And then if we have no right to defend ourselves, all they need to do is come in, make the rules, and take you away. And between everything, they'll just make us slaves.
Well, you know, somebody made the point. Somebody made the point today. If those that became slaves back in the 17th and 18th and early part of the 19th century, I mean, the slave trade was abolished by the Constitution in 1808. You couldn't import slaves after 1808 because the Founding Fathers finally came around to implementing a biblical view of public policy. After 1808, no more slave trade was allowed in the United States. But you still had the institution of slavery was still protected. You still had slaves that were here. Those slaves were having children who in turn went into slavery. So the problem wasn't dealt with. It took the shedding of the blood of 600,000 Americans, brothers, in order to deal with the institution of slavery. You know, but this individual made the observation, you know, if those that were kidnapped and sold into slavery, if they had had guns and had been able to defend themselves, they never would have become slaves. I mean, you know, if they'd had their version of a Second Amendment in the 17th century, they wouldn't have had to be reduced to slavery. They would have had the opportunity to defend themselves. And, you know, and like you say, James, the Second Amendment is what protects us. It's not for hunting. It's for self-defense and for defense in particular against tyranny. Defense against violent men and defense against tyranny.
It's one other thing, too. It's also going to protect our rights to worship our God as we choose, because as much as our God is hated in the nation today, what's them to say, okay, we're going to take this God away and you can worship Allah or Buddha or whoever, but you can no longer worship Jesus Christ.
Well, you know, one of the first things that Hitler did in Nazi Germany was disarm the German people. That's what he did, and it wasn't long after that where he started to restrict religious worship because he knew there wasn't anything that the people could do about it. They had no way to stop this encroachment of a tyrannical federal government. Listen, thank you, James. I appreciate the call. And let's grab Judge Napolitano's clip number 4. And, you know, and Napolitano makes a good point here. You know, but the question is, you know, he's talking about the constitutional issue here. Well, let's listen first of all to Judge Napolitano talking about the constitutional issue involved. But here's the question I've got. What if President Obama doesn't pay attention to the Constitution? Here's Judge Napolitano.
We think he's talking about something like asking the Environmental Protection Administration to impose a tax on bullets. The city of Chicago attempted to do this, and Rahm Emanuel, of all people, told the city council, this is not going to work. You can't tax something more than the thing itself is worth. They were going to tax bullets that cost about 50 cents each over $5. Now, if they did that, and if we were forced to pay that tax, who would it harm the most? It would harm the poor, people who need guns the most with which to protect themselves because they wouldn't be able to afford the bullets, right. Or it would create an underground market in bullets. Question, can the president impose a tax on his own? Answer, no. The Constitution specifically says only the Congress can tax the people, can raise money, and can spend the money thus raised. Well, okay, but this president has not hesitated in the past to bypass Congress, to to bring his own personal will into the law, even though Congress is supposed to write
Why
the
would you
laws.
make it so complicated? If you were President Obama and you wanted to do this, why would you impose this tax? Why wouldn't you just sign an executive order talking about gun control?
Because he doesn't have the authority to do that.
Well, let's hope that he believes that and accepts that. I'm not sure. Napolitano, we all agree, you and I here and Judge Napolitano, we all agree he doesn't have the constitutional authority to do it. But if he does it, who's going to stop him? I mean, that's kind of the question. Who's going to stop him? You know, and Wyoming, and this is part of what we are in our action alert, I think the direction we may be going with the action alert is to urge people in their individual states to contact their lawmakers in their states to protect their right to bear arms. And remember, this is a very, very significant thing to understand. The Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say the right of the states to keep and bear arms. It doesn't say the rights of the militia to keep and bear arms. It is the right of the people. And remember, in the 10th Amendment, which deals with state sovereignty, well, I better get that so I read it exactly correct. I want to be misquoting here, but here's the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So notice what the founders are saying in the 10th Amendment. There are certain rights that belong to the states. There are other rights, other powers that do not belong to the states. They belong to whom? They belong to the people. Do you see that? That's very, very important. Founders made a distinction between the states. The states have certain powers of action. That's protected in the Constitution. And if the states are not given that power of action by the Constitution, then those powers of action are reserved to the people, meaning not even the states are allowed to tamper with that right. And what does the Second Amendment say? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the founders are saying, look, the states don't even have any authority whatsoever to control your guns. They've got no right to do it constitutionally, no authority to do it. Your city doesn't have a right to do it. So when New York tries to institute a gun ban, when Chicago tries to institute a gun ban, Andrew Cuomo's out there saying he's going to have the toughest gun laws in the country. Well, Chicago's got them right now. They've already had 13 murders in 2013. They're running ahead of last year's pace at 550 people murdered last year by handguns, and they're ahead of last year's pace, and they got the toughest gun control. That place ought to be Nirvana. That ought to be Disney World if gun control laws worked. So the point is that this is a right that belongs to the people. Not even the states are allowed or a city is allowed to infringe on those rights. So what Chicago doing, New York doing, flatly unconstitutional. And I came across a story yesterday in Wyoming. They are crafting a piece of legislation in Wyoming that would make it a felony offense for anyone to come into the state of Wyoming and try to enforce a ban on semi-automatic firearms or limiting the size of gun magazines. So the law that they are crafting would make those laws unenforceable in the state of Wyoming. They'd be saying, hey, you can pass your law, but if you try to enforce it in our state, that's going to be a felony offense. We read the Constitution. We know that the people have a right to keep and bear arms, and you have no authority to deprive us of those rights. So you try to do it, that's going to be a felony offense. That's going to be a crime in our state because they are serious about protecting their right to freedom. Now let's play this clip from Piers Morgan, clip number 5. Piers Morgan had a shootout with Ben Shapiro, and by all accounts, Ben Shapiro bested him in that exchange. But I want you to listen to the snide way that Piers Morgan refers to the Constitution. Let's listen.
The way that the NRA through the 80s and 90s and this last
Piers,
decade
avoiding the breakdown of left and
have
right
deliberately
here is
tried to frame
irresponsible.
this as a left-wing attack on the American Constitution and the Second Amendment. Exactly what you've tried to do. You come in, you brandish your little book as if I don't know
My
what's
little
in
book,
there.
that's the Constitution of the United States, our founding document,
I know
Piers.
what's in your Constitution.
Do you really?
I've been debating this for a very long time.
Then you
What
should
I
read the
haven't-
Second Amendment
what
again.
I know the Second Amendment. What I haven't heard is one coherent reason why any civilian in America needs an AR-15 military-style assault weapon. Tell me why you need one.
So that's interesting. The way he referred to the and a military-style weapon, I mean, we need those to protect ourselves against tyranny. That's what Piers Morgan does not seem to understand. And he, being a Brit, if anybody ought to understand why the American people need military-style weapons to defend themselves, it ought to be somebody from Britain, because we needed it to protect ourselves from his ancestors. This is what Thomas Jefferson said. The strongest reason for people to retain the right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny in government. And that was the whole purpose of the Second Amendment. It wasn't so you could hunt. It wasn't so you could go shoot skeet. It was so you could protect yourself and your family against violent men and protect your communities from the tyranny of an overreaching government. That, Piers Morgan, is why we need them, to protect ourselves from people like you. And you notice how the dismissive way he refers to our Constitution? Your little book. And when he uses the word little, that's a term to denigrate the Constitution. It's a demeaning term. It's a degrading term. It's an insignificant little book. It's a nothing little book. It doesn't matter to me. I have no respect for your little book. So that's fine and the problem here, frankly, is that Barack Obama thinks about the Constitution the same way that Piers Morgan does. That's the spooky thing here. He doesn't have any more respect for the Constitution of the United States than Piers Morgan does. It's a little book that easily can be ignored if it gets in the way. You're listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk, 888-589-8840. If you would like to join the program in the last segment here, you're listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back with more. Focal Point, AFR Talk.